colleagues in some of the blue states, like the number one regulated state in the country is California, where we have 83,000 do's and don'ts. California has something like 412,000 do's and don'ts. Could you imagine trying to, as a small business owner, or even a large business owner, even if you have a cachet of attorneys on staff to sort their way through that, that's almost a phenomenal, an unbearable number of regulations. Let me tell you, that reminds me, let me tell you something that we are trying to do in South Carolina. We are working with Google to try and create a large language model with the 10 million words that our Code of Regulations represents, and working to determine where there are duplicative regulations and try to zero in on those and try and get rid of those first. The Speaker of the House is giving me a directive of removing 25% of our regulations.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Hey everyone, welcome to the American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Fromm. Hey, Engineer Matt, I know you run a small business in Colorado, and I'm sure you're in touch with a lot of other business owners and entrepreneurs, just in your daily life. How do you guys interact with the regulations that really impact almost everybody? Like, how does that influence the folks that you talk to there in Colorado?
Yeah, David, fortunately for me, my business stays fairly untouched with regulations, but I've got friends who have to deal with all sorts of permitting issues, different types of certifications. Look at anything in the restaurant industry, for example, that's one step after another, and sometimes these small business owners feel choked by some of the regulations. You think that sometimes, I can understand some of these rules, but when they become overbearing, you can absolutely tell. Look at anyone who's, we've had some great examples of this on the show with people who've run food trucks, having to get permits in every single location, like part of a state that they want to operate their food truck in, hair salons, the crazy permitting requirements for that. We've seen a lot of that on this show.
Yeah. I'm glad you're paying attention, Matt.
I know. I am listening. Contrary to popular belief, I am paying attention.
Yeah, no. I think we've talked to a lot of people where where regulation has a real impact, and then maybe even stopping them from achieving their dream of starting a business and achieving more, or shutting them down. So I'm pleased to have this conversation today about a leader in a state, in this case South Carolina, who's really pushing some great legislation that'll hopefully help relieve that for South Carolinians. So. The Founding Fathers' idea of a free society is based on the fact that the people who are elected are the ones who make the laws, not unelected bureaucrats. That thinking traces back to political philosophers like John Locke, who believed in government by consent, not by decree. But the idea of an administrative state started under Woodrow Wilson and became a reality under FDR's New Deal. And over time, rules and regulations which carry the weight of law have come from unelected agencies instead of legislators who are accountable to the voters. So how do we change that balance? That's the idea behind the Reins Act, which requires lawmakers to approve major regulations before they take effect. It's not anti-regulation, it's pro-accountability. So some states have already passed some form of the Reins Act, and now lawmakers in South Carolina are considering their own version called the Small Business Regulatory Freedom Act. So I want to welcome to the podcast the sponsor of the bill, who is also the chairman of the House Regulations and Administrative Procedures Committee, Jeff Bradley, to talk about this bill. Representative, thank you for joining us.
You're more than welcome. Good to see you.
Our organization, we've been very excited about kind of pushing back against regulation and restoring accountability at the state and federal level. But before we kind of get into that conversation, our organization, Americans for Prosperity, is doing something we call our America's 250 celebrations, where we celebrate America's 250th year of independence this whole year. So, we've been talking about how throughout our history, people have taken one small step in order to get involved and to really change their community, their state, the nation, really. So I'm curious, in your case, like, what got you involved in public service and politics?
That's actually a great question. It's it's a little bit of a funny story. I had been in my community. I had been involved in educational initiatives, charitable operations. I was on the foundation board, and for 30 years I had been engaged in civic activity. And a friend of mine who was in the role that I'm in now as a House member was, bless his heart, going through a divorce on the front page of the newspaper, and it was terrible, if you could imagine. And I called him up, and well, actually, what he said is he wasn't going to run again. And I called him up and I said, "Hey, I'm not going to run if you have any desire to run, because I don't want to run against you. But if you're not going to run again, I think I'm interested in taking this to the next step." And he said, "No, I'm finished." And so I ran, and I ran unopposed the first time, and I've been opposed a couple of times since then. And David, I can tell you that having run opposed and run unopposed is much better. So
That's new, keen political insight on this podcast.
and I've been in the South Carolina House for the last 12 years. So 6
Yeah.
terms.
So when you decided to take that step and run, what you thought you would be doing and like how it would be fulfilling to you and how you'd serve your community, is that lined up and held up over the dozen years, or has that changed a lot?
Well, I'm not. There's only so much time in a day, and the way our system works is we have to go to Columbia for 3 days a week for 22 weeks a year. Most all of the other activity has stopped, and so it's just basically focused on the house stuff, and it has been an interesting ride in the housework. And it also, having been there for a while, it's interesting how one accumulates influence over time in South Carolina. It's pretty much driven by seniority. And so I tell people I can get more done in a half a day now than I could in 3 months 12 years ago. So
Oh, wow.
it's just easier to get stuff done. I know where the decision makers are. I have their phone numbers in my contact rolls, and it's just easier to get stuff done.
Well, that's great. Well, speaking of getting stuff done, we hope that that this next topic and what we're talking about is one of those things that gets done. So turning to the Small Business Regulatory Freedom Act, when did you first start to see that this was an issue and become interested in it?
Well, I've been in the regulations committee since 2017, and I've been the chairman for the last 5 or 6 years. And so I have been watching this whole regulation thing, and I have a bit of a reputation for squeezing our state agencies when they our system. An agency has to announce that they intend to promulgate a regulation, and it goes through a very structured process. And I make each one of the agencies that are trying to promulgate a new reg come in and sit down and talk to me. And my team sits down, and the trick for us is reading the silly things, right? I think in the past you were getting a lot of rubber stamps from the way we did this prior to 2017 is we would allow the standing committees to address the regulation promulgation. And a lot of times they were so busy doing other stuff, they just sort of gave it the rubber stamp and just moved on. And that is what has allowed a significant portion of this accretion that has occurred, just the growth of the administrative state. And so we're trying to push that back a little bit.
That sounds so familiar because so often when we talk about regulations, things like the REINS Act, it's really about having the legislature, do their job, by reading, really understanding what the regulations that are being passed and being a check on the administrative state. And so often it is because of, there's so much work to be done. There's just this, avalanche of stuff to read, I'm sure, and consume. So, how do you think? Maybe take us through like how this, how the Small Business Regulatory Freedom Act would work, and the benefits that you think could come about from it.
Well, I'm going to have to put my glasses on, and I might look down at my notes here for this. You got basically 5 provisions. There's a regulatory sunset. There's a limit on the authority to enact regulations. There's a regulatory budget that we put in place, an enhanced economic analysis, and then something that we're pretty excited about is the citizen deference in the administrative law proceedings. Now, that sounds a little complicated, but what had happened in the past is when regulations were challenged in the state, they had to go through our administrative law court, and the statutes were written such that the court leaned on the agency as being kind of the for lack of a better term, a know-it-all of that particular regulation. So there was deference to the agency versus the citizen who was bringing the issue to court. And here at this point, we are offering the deference to be on behalf of the citizen or the business that's bringing the issue. But I think the real essence of this is in the 7-year sunset, where every 7 years, if an agency does not bring forth a good reason to reauthorize a regulation, it sunsets, and that's a pretty big deal.
That is, yeah.
And so I mean, I can go into more detail, but I don't want your audience to fall asleep at the switch.
Well, I mean, the essence of this is like, yeah, I think that sunset's a pretty transformative, because it's just an automatic speed bump or an automatic check over the regulatory kind of environment that.
And you'd be shocked, David, how the agencies are, and the vested interests are squealing like pigs, in that they don't want their regulations to go away if it's protecting something that's vitally important to them. So the truth of the matter is, we just want to force some element of analysis to determine whether or not the regulation is truly necessary. We don't necessarily want to regulations are required to run a government. There's just no question about that. We in South Carolina have 83,372 do's and don'ts, and we are the number 36 state that has the least regulations. So there are only 14 states that have fewer regulations than South Carolina, but we still have 83,372. So all of those require somebody to look at it constantly and determine whether or not they're in compliance with the regulations that exist in the state of South Carolina. So our goal is to try and get rid of some of those that are no longer necessary. And then, as you could reasonably deduce, that will in effect cut the cost for small businesses and individuals in the state of South Carolina.
Sure. So what are some of the stories that you heard from small business owners kind of in the lead up to this legislation?
I'll give you one example. I had a friend who was the managing partner of a partnership that owned a hotel on the beach. I live on Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, which is right on the ocean in South Carolina. And
we should have filmed this on location.
We'll do the next one. We'll do the next one that way. Do the next one on the back of my boat.
That's great.
So my friend is doing an $11 million upfit on his pool deck. And he goes through the process of getting a contract. This is an inordinately ethical human being that was doing this work. And he gets to the point where the state comes in, the Department of Environmental Services comes in, and they object to, if you look down at the steps going into a pool, David, and there's a little stripe near the end. This stripe was a quarter of an inch off, and the regulations folks shut the project down. The guy is attempting to open an $11 million project and reopen his hotel, and at the last minute, a non-elected bureaucrat with, I don't know, who knows, maybe the guy had a fight with his wife that morning, but he stopped this whole project. We have to stop that sort of stuff. That's kind of where we're going.
So are there any consistencies or any trends that you hear from small business owners as to the most burdensome regulation that people are encountering, or is it kind of all over the place?
David, it's all over the place. The problem is, how can a small business owner who doesn't have the resources or the time stop and go through all the regulations that are required or foisted upon his or her business? They just don't. And if they don't, and they feel the need to protect themselves from the regulatory state, then they're going to have to hire an attorney to give them guidance. And again, that cuts into their profit. I mean, the lawyers love it, but I don't think small businesses do.
I can really understand how small business owners, bumping into these regulations all the time, how it really affects them. What would you say to just South Carolinians in general? How will this benefit them?
If we can accomplish, I'm going to answer that by giving you a little background on something that occurred in, of all places, British Columbia in Canada. British Columbia at the turn of this century was known for its regulatory environment, and it was bad, and it was slowing innovation, entrepreneurship, and growth. And so they started to implement issues that reduced the regulations. And over a few years' time, they reduced about 36% of their regulations. And as a result of that, they enjoyed a 92% increase in their gross domestic product.
Wow.
Staggering, is it not? Just staggering.
That's a doubling, basically.
Basically a doubling. They were behind the national average. They caught up with the national average and then exceeded that by 1.3%. And these numbers may not sound like much, but when you apply them as a percentage of what your GDP growth was before, it's staggering what we could do here. So what this can bring for the citizens of South Carolina is reduce their costs, make their businesses more profitable, free up time to be able to do more business and less government. This is a win-win, except for those who benefit from the over-regulation of the individual or the business.
Well, and who are those people? I mean, who are the opponents of this legislation?
Well, there are some individual groups. The environmentalists have come out against this. They love regulations because it stops growth. And so I think that their concern is that regulations that they fought hard to get in place are going to be removed and not reauthorized. That's one example. There are a group in Charleston who are the harbor pilots for the state ports authority, and they're concerned that we as a General Assembly, if we don't reauthorize appropriately the small number of regulations that they have, then they won't be able to operate with South Carolinian rules, and it'll revert to federal rules. So everything, as you know, you've been doing this a while, so you recognize how complex everything is, and there's second and third and fourth order of magnitude events that occur when you do something in the government. And this is no different, but that's just a couple of examples.
Has of the state agencies, the regulators, made their voices heard on this?
Yeah, we have an entity that is required to review regulations every 5 years, and the part of the reason I brought this legislation is that I don't necessarily have control over the agencies and their regulations unless they're trying to promulgate new ones. Then we have total control. But they're supposed to come to us every 5 years and tell us what regulations need to be removed or updated and that sort of stuff. And that really wasn't happening. And there was a group that was supposed to oversee that. And that group objected to this legislation because the 7-year review of as many as 5,200 regulations means that they don't have enough staff to be able to oversee the work that they're being told to do by this statute. And they objected to it because they didn't think they'd have enough resources, which is kind of short-sighted because we can change that. We can give more resources to the analysis of these regulations if we see this as a beneficial thing for growing the state's economy. So that's just one example of state agencies. We've gotten the state agencies to the point now where they are not so sure Chairman Bradley might not go off on them. So they really don't want to come through my committee. Last year, we had 110 proposed regulations. This year, we started out at 35. Right now, we have 43 items on which we have to take action, but 10 of them are removing regulations from the book. So we're down to 33 regulations this year from 110 next year. And I believe some portion of that is how difficult my team has made the promulgation of new regulations. So we're tough on them. But I mean,
good.
Well, we think we're fair with them as well. We just make them justify quite literally every word. And sometimes it comes down to a shall, a may, a want, a will. And we tell them all there will be no ambiguity. There's no opportunity for an unelected bureaucrat to make a judgment call on black letter stuff. So we work hard at that.
Well, I mean, it seems to me like you're being the appropriate check and balance on, on the executive branch. So I'd applaud you for doing that.
I think we are. I was not particularly happy when I was assigned to the regulations committee in 2017, but I just put my head down, went to work, and what I've come to really understand, David, is how much we can change agencies' behavior. I hate to use the word power because it can be misconstrued, but we have a tremendous amount of control over this process. And I'm in a very interesting position now in my role that I hadn't anticipated. And so it's
well, I'm glad you're in it. And Mr. Chairman, I'll tell you, we've talked over the last year, especially since on the federal level, the Loper Bright decision. I mean, we've been talking about the administrative state and, reins at the state level, regulatory, your regulatory kind of stories run amok on the federal level. And we've done a number of episodes on this. And, I always thought, I was always a guy who wanted to fight taxes and, fight for school choice and stuff like that. And regulations is kind of an eye roll. And it is such a big deal for Americans' prosperity, and I think for the American people, because it influences, or it comes into contact with so much of our daily lives. And particularly if you're an entrepreneur or you're a small business person, it can just make or break you, whether you have a business or not. And, especially when we look at the energy sector, I mean, it's so important to what we're doing as a nation and even our national security. So I've been pleased really with the trend on the federal level, but then where the real action's happening is on the state level, where we see reins and other, sunset provisions passing in state by state, I mean, that's just going to make a real impact on people's lives, and also hopefully really grow the economy, let people live better lives because they're earning more money and having more opportunities.
Yeah, well, that's what we're looking at. Our colleagues in some of the blue states, like the number one regulated state in the country is California, where we have 83,000 do's and don'ts. California has something like 412,000 do's and don'ts. Could you imagine charging? As a small business owner, or even a large business owner, even if you have a cachet of attorneys on staff to sort their way through that, that's almost a phenomenal, an unbearable number of regulations. Let me tell you, that reminds me, let me tell you something that we're trying to do in South Carolina. We are working with Google to try and, part of my role is also, they have folded in AI into our regulations, AI and cybersecurity.
Oh, wow.
So that comes under my purview as well. But we're working with Google to create a large language model with the 10 million words that our Code of Regulations represents, and working to determine where there are duplicative regulations and try to zero in on those and try and get rid of those first. The Speaker of the House is giving me a directive of removing 25% of our regulations. So we have to get rid of, we got some work to do.
Well, that's so exciting, though. I mean, I do think AI is kind of transformative there. But, we just had, for instance, the state of Illinois, where I live, is so dysfunctional in terms of how the legislature operates. I mean, even if you have rules, they just disregard them or waive them. But, it's a classic place where a bill, a massive thousands of page budget bill gets dropped at 3 a.m. and you got to vote on it. And in years past, people would try to rifle through, but they never knew what they're voting on. Well, with AI, you actually can start to figure out what people are voting on. And, legislators can figure out what they're voting on. If you kind of drop it into AI and it spits out like what's actually happening. And that's just a simple way of doing it. I think, man, the applications are endless. Yeah, and hopefully, really for efficiency, it could be a great tool.
I think your concept of the applications are endless, and you're seeing it all over the place right now. I mean, I know that if you are following the stock market at all, you have seen that services or software as a service entities are just getting blasted from innovations that are occurring in the AI world. So, it's going to be fascinating to see where that goes. I'll give you an example. At the Department of Environmental Services, they have implemented an AI on one particular permitting process. It's a water permitting process that required engineers to spend 200 of their hours going through the application process. Our AI applied to this has reduced that to 75 minutes.
Oh, my.
Just think about the efficiency that represents. Now, how can we scale that across government writ large is going to be the battle going forward. So it's all pretty exciting stuff.
That is super exciting. I'm excited to see what kind of work you guys do. So as we wrap up, Mr. Chairman, I'd love to hear, what are you most excited about for South Carolina, or concerned about, either way. But when you look at the future of South Carolina, you're a top leader there. What are you excited or concerned about?
I know we were talking about regulations, but a significant portion of the work that I do relates to AI. And what I'm most excited about in the state of South Carolina is how we have begun to, across the state, involving state agencies, the university system, businesses, education, K through 12, and the higher education, we're adding all these people together, and we're working to create a fertile field of AI literate citizens who are able to work with applied AI, and how we are probably going to transform our state and allow the efficiencies that you and I were just talking about a minute ago to be implemented across business, education, state government, and unleash a certain element of entrepreneurship and efficiency gains, productivity gains. And if we have a lot of processes that can be automated and moved off to do the grunt work through AI, you're going to have a population of happier employees across the state. And so what we're doing in South Carolina in AI is actually unparalleled in the nation. Nobody else is trying to integrate it the way we are. And I'm super, super excited about that.
Wow. Then I really am going to pay attention to what South Carolina's doing. I appreciate the work that you're doing. That's fabulous. And I really applaud the work you're doing here on trying to battle the regulation state and the work that you're trying to do passing your version of the reins
we just
bill.
have to get it. We just have to get it through the Senate. That's where we are right now. It's stuck in the Senate Judiciary Committee in a subcommittee over there.
Well, Chairman Jeff Bradley from the South Carolina House, we really appreciate you being with us.
I enjoyed it. Good to talk to you.
Hey, folks, if you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our channels, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take them for granted. Go out there and defend liberty and freedom. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.